Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. My story begins 3 years ago when I inherited my grandparents' house. It's a beautiful old farmhouse sitting on 5 acres of land just outside the city limits. My grandparents built it themselves back in the 1950s, and I have countless memories of visiting them there as a kid. When my grandmother passed, my grandfather had been gone for years already. I was shocked to learn she'd left the property to me. At the time, I was living in a cramped apartment in the city with my wife and our dog. We'd been saving for a house, but the market was insane. My grandmother's place was a godsend. A beautiful home with history and character, mortgage-free. We moved in within a month, excited to start our new life in what felt like the perfect blend of country living with proximity to the city. The property was perfect except for one tiny, annoying detail. Access. You see, the house sits at the end of a long driveway that connects to the main road. When my grandparents built the place, they were surrounded by farmland. But over the decades, that farmland was sold off and developed. The area around us was now an upscale neighborhood called Oakwood Estates, complete with a fancy entrance gate, manicured lawns, and, you guessed it, a homeowners association. My grandparents had always refused to join the HOA when it formed 20 years ago. They had a legally documented easement that guaranteed their right to use the driveway that now ran through Oakwood Estates to access their property. It had never been an issue while they were alive. My grandmother was well liked in the community, and the previous HOA board had respected the legal arrangement. For the first few months after we moved in, everything was peaceful. We renovated the inside of the house, planted a garden, and settled into our new life. I had a few casual interactions with neighbors who seemed friendly enough. Then one day I found a letter in my mailbox from the Oakwood Estates HOA. It was a friendly reminder that our property was in violation of several HOA regulations. Our mailbox wasn't the approved style. We needed to remove the chicken coop my grandparents had built, and our fence needed to be repainted in an approved color. The letter ended by inviting me to the next HOA meeting to discuss these issues. I was confused. I knew my property wasn't part of their HOA. My grandmother had been very clear about that, and I had the paperwork to prove it. So I called the number on the letter and spoke to a woman named Patricia, who identified herself as the HOA president. "I think there's been a mistake," I explained. "My property isn't actually part of Oakwood Estates. We have an easement agreement, but we're not subject to HOA rules." There was a long pause before Patricia responded, her tone noticeably cooler. "Well, that's a matter of interpretation. Your driveway runs through our community, which creates certain obligations. I think it would be best if you attended our next meeting so we can sort this out." I agreed, thinking this was just a simple misunderstanding. My wife wasn't convinced. "I don't trust this," she said that night. "You should bring copies of the easement and property documents to that meeting." Smart woman, my wife. I dug up all the relevant paperwork. The deed to the property, the easement agreement, and even the letter my grandmother had received years ago, confirming her property was exempt from the HOA. Better safe than sorry, right? The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a fancy building with a pool and tennis courts that I'd never been invited to use. As soon as I walked in, I could feel eyes on me. About 20 people were seated in chairs facing a table where 4 people sat. The HOA board, I presumed. Patricia, a well-dressed woman in her 50s with an expensive haircut, gestured for me to take a seat. "Now that everyone is here," she began, "I'd like to discuss the situation with the non-conforming property at the end of Maple Drive." For the next 15 minutes, Patricia outlined all the ways my property was negatively impacting Oakwood Estates. My rustic house, her word not mine, was bringing down property values. My chickens were creating noise and odor issues. Completely false. We had exactly 4 hens that were barely audible. My unregulated use of the driveway was causing excessive wear and tear on their private road. When she finally paused for breath, I raised my hand. "I understand your concerns, but as I mentioned on the phone, my property isn't part of Oakwood Estates or subject to your HOA regulations. I have all the documentation right here." I pulled out my folder and offered to show the board the paperwork. Patricia barely glanced at it. "Those arrangements were made before the current board was elected," she said dismissively. "Times have changed. Oakwood Estates has become an exclusive community, and having a non-conforming property with unrestricted access through our neighborhood is simply unacceptable." A man seated next to Patricia, who introduced himself as Robert, the HOA treasurer, leaned forward. "We've actually been discussing a solution that would benefit everyone. We'd be willing to make you a generous offer to purchase your property. Given its condition, I think you'll find our offer more than fair." I was stunned. My property isn't for sale. "Perhaps you should consider it," Patricia said with a thin smile. It would resolve all these issues cleanly. There are no issues to resolve, I replied, feeling my temper rising. I have a legal right to access my property via the easement, and my home isn't subject to your regulations. The meeting deteriorated from there. It became clear that this wasn't about mailboxes or chickens. They wanted my land. Apparently, a developer had approached them about expanding Oakwood Estates, and my 5 acres were the perfect place to add more luxury homes. They saw me as an obstacle to their plans, and they were determined to remove me one way or another. I left the meeting angry, but not particularly worried. I had the law on my side. The easement was ironclad, and they couldn't force me to sell. I figured they'd eventually accept reality and move on. I was wrong. So very wrong. The harassment started small. I began receiving weekly violation notices with escalating fine amounts. My mailbox disappeared one night, only to be replaced with an approved model, which I promptly removed and replaced with my original one. Someone called animal control about my unauthorized livestock, resulting in an inspection that, of course, found no violations. Then things got more serious. Cars would accidentally block my driveway, forcing me to go knock on doors to get them moved. Anonymous complaints were filed with the county about non-existent building code violations, triggering inspections. Someone even cut down the beautiful old oak tree at the entrance to my driveway, claiming it was diseased. It wasn't. Through all of this, I tried to stay calm. I installed security cameras, documented every incident, and consulted with a lawyer who specialized in property disputes. He assured me that I was in the right legally, but advised caution in how I responded. Don't give them anything they can use against you, he warned. Then came the morning that pushed me over the edge. I left for work at my usual time, 7 a.m. Everything seemed normal, but when I returned home that evening, I found something that made my blood run cold. A chain-link fence topped with barbed wire had been installed across my driveway, completely blocking access to my property. A large "no trespassing" sign hung on it, along with a notice claiming this was HOA property. I was livid. I got out of my car and examined the fence. It was serious construction. Metal posts sunk into concrete, heavy-duty chain link, and actual barbed wire on top. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment action. This had been planned. As I stood there trying to figure out what to do, a car pulled up behind me. It was Patricia and Robert. "Is there a problem?" Patricia asked with mock concern. "You know damn well there's a problem," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "You've illegally blocked access to my property," Robert shrugged. "This is HOA land. We have every right to secure it as we see fit. My easement is being reviewed," Patricia interrupted. "In the meantime, we've had complaints about non-residents using our private road. We're simply protecting our community." "How am I supposed to get home?" I demanded. Patricia's smile was cold. "Well, that is a problem, isn't it? Perhaps now you'll be more open to discussing our offer." They drove off, leaving me standing there in disbelief. I called my wife, who was inside our house with no way to leave, then contacted the police. The responding officer was sympathetic, but unhelpful. "This looks like a civil matter," he said after hearing both sides. Patricia and Robert had returned once the police arrived. "You'll need to resolve this through the courts." That night, my wife and I stayed in a hotel. I couldn't believe we had been literally barred from our own home. First thing the next morning, I called my lawyer and explained the situation. "They've crossed a line," he said gravely. "This is illegal on multiple levels, restricting access to your property, violating your easement rights, and potentially false imprisonment since your wife was trapped inside. We need to get an emergency injunction." He filed the paperwork immediately, and we were granted an emergency hearing the following day. The judge was appalled by the HOA's actions and issued a temporary restraining order requiring them to remove the fence immediately and cease all interference with my access. When I returned to my property that afternoon, accompanied by a sheriff's deputy to enforce the order, Patricia was there watching as workers removed the fence. She didn't speak to me, but the look she gave me was venomous. The fence incident was the final straw. With my lawyer's guidance, I decided it was time to go on the offensive. We filed a comprehensive lawsuit against the HOA for 1. Violation of easement rights, 2. Illegal restriction of access to private property, 3. Harassment and intimidation, 4. False imprisonment for trapping my wife inside our property, 5. Illegal destruction of property, the oak tree, 6. Defamation for their false claims about code violations. We also requested an injunction to prevent any further interference with my property rights, plus compensatory and punitive damages. My lawyer was confident we had a strong case, especially with all the documentation I'd been gathering. "They picked the wrong person to mess with," he told me. Most people would have given in by now, but they didn't account for your determination or your grandmother's foresight in keeping such detailed records. The discovery phase of the lawsuit revealed even more than we'd anticipated. Emails between board members showed they had been planning to force me out from the moment I inherited the property. They had approached developers before ever speaking to me about purchasing my land, and most damning of all, they had discussed the fence strategy explicitly as a way to make his life so miserable he'll have no choice but to sell. When my lawyer showed me these emails, I was shocked by the calculated malice they displayed. These weren't just overzealous neighbors. This was a coordinated campaign to bully me out of my home for profit. The HOA's lawyer reached out about a settlement several times, but their offers were insultingly low and didn't include any admission of wrongdoing. I refused. This wasn't about money for me. It was about justice and the right to live peacefully in my home. The case finally went to trial 6 months after the fence incident. It lasted for 3 days, during which the HOA's actions were laid bare in excruciating detail. Patricia, Robert, and the other board members tried to portray themselves as concerned community leaders acting in the best interests of Oakwood Estates. But their own emails and the testimony of other residents, not all of whom supported the board's tactics, told a different story. On the 3rd day, the judge delivered his verdict. His face was stern as he addressed the courtroom. In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a blatant abuse of power as displayed by the defendants in this case, he began. Homeowners associations serve an important function when they operate within the bounds of their authority, but when they exceed those bounds and engage in harassment, intimidation, and outright illegal activity, they must be held accountable. He ruled entirely in my favor, finding that the HOA had deliberately and maliciously violated my property rights. He made permanent the injunction against any interference with my easement or property, and then came the damages. For compensatory damages, I award the plaintiff $75,000 for legal fees, temporary housing costs, property damage, and emotional distress, the judge announced. That seemed reasonable to me, but he wasn't finished. Additionally, given the egregious nature of the defendant's actions and the clear evidence of malicious intent, I am awarding punitive damages in the amount of $450,000. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Patricia looked like she'd been struck. Robert had his head in his hands. These punitive damages are to be paid by the HOA as an entity, the judge continued. But I am also holding the board members who participated in this scheme personally liable. The evidence shows they acted outside the scope of their authority and against the interests of the very community they claimed to protect. As we left the courthouse, my lawyer was grinning from ear to ear. That's one of the largest judgments I've ever seen against an HOA, he told me. They'll be feeling this for years to come. He wasn't wrong. The aftermath of the verdict was swift and dramatic. The HOA's insurance refused to cover the punitive damages, claiming the board's actions were intentional and therefore excluded from coverage. This meant the money would have to come from the HOA's reserves and from the board members themselves. Within a week, all 5 board members had resigned. Patricia and Robert both put their houses on the market shortly after. A special meeting was called for all Oakwood Estates residents to elect a new board and discuss how to handle the financial impact of the judgment. I was invited to that meeting, not by the former board, of course, but by a group of residents who had been appalled by what their HOA had done in their name. I was hesitant to attend, but my wife encouraged me. "You should go," she said. "Show them you're a reasonable person who just wanted to be left alone." The meeting was held in the same clubhouse, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Instead of hostility, I was met with apologies from multiple residents. Many claimed they had no idea what the board had been doing and were horrified when the details came out in court. A man named Thomas, who had lived in Oakwood Estates for over a decade, addressed the group. "The actions of the previous board have not only cost us financially but have damaged our reputation and community spirit," he said. "We need to make things right and ensure nothing like this ever happens again." The new board, elected that night, immediately passed resolutions acknowledging my property rights and easement, and formally apologizing for the previous board's actions. They also invited me to use the community amenities, pool, tennis courts, clubhouse, as a gesture of goodwill, though I was under no obligation to pay HOA fees. As for the financial impact, they were forced to implement a special assessment on all homeowners to cover part of the judgment, with the former board members covering the rest through personal payments and liens on their properties. The developer who had been waiting in the wings to buy my land quickly disappeared when the lawsuit made the local news. In the year since the trial, things have settled into a peaceful coexistence. My wife and I completed our renovations on the house, and our property looks better than ever, though still delightfully non-conforming by HOA standards. I keep my chickens, we're up to 6 now, maintain my garden, and drive up and down my easement driveway without incident. Patricia and Robert both sold their homes at significant losses and moved away. I occasionally see them mentioned in the local paper's court reports. It seems they've been sued by several Oakwood Estates residents who felt misled and financially harmed by their actions as board members. As for me, I used a portion of the judgment money to create a proper fence around my property, not to keep people out, but to clearly delineate the boundaries. I also donated to a legal aid fund that helps homeowners fight against HOA overreach. The rest went into upgrading our home and setting aside a college fund for the baby my wife and I are expecting in a few months. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my porch looking out at my property, I think about how close we came to losing it all to greed and intimidation. I'm grateful that I had the resources and support to fight back, and I'm aware that many others in similar situations don't. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's that standing up for your rights matters, even when, especially when, you're facing an opponent who thinks they can bully you into submission. The barbed wire fence they built to keep me out became the perfect symbol of their approach to community, exclusionary, harmful, and ultimately self-defeating. In trying to force me out, they only succeeded in strengthening my resolve to stay, and stay I will for many years to come. Update. It's been 3 months since I posted this story, and I thought I'd share some interesting developments. The fallout from the HOA butt-ass actions continues to ripple through the community in ways I never expected. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I'm not sure if this is pro or not, but I got revenge on a douchebag I used to volunteer firefight with. This was in the early mid-2000s. I decided to join the local fire department as a volunteer firefighter. I did it for about 5 years, and it was great. Training consisted of 3 months of fire training, 2 nights a week, and all day Saturday. And then you would go to EMT training, another 3 months of training. I was about a year, and I was asked to help train some new recruits. One of the lieutenants, Amy, was a short, middle-aged woman who was so full of fire she could make a grown man cry. One of those people who commands both fear and respect wherever she went. Honestly, a great lieutenant and great person. When she wasn't being a drill sergeant, she was extremely kind and generous. She would often bake people cakes and treats and deliver them to the various stations in our department. However, in this new academy class that I was asked to help with, there was a cocky kid that we will call Aaron. Aaron talked big during the training and acted like he was the all-American hero. Like he was going to be the lead badass in Backdraft 2. He performed moderately well in training, but far from the top of the class. He gets assigned to Amy's station, which is a pretty quiet station in the department. A few months after he starts, Amy swings by my station one night to say hi. She brings us the motherlode cake from Claim Jumper, massive 6-layer cake. She explained that she had treated her crew to a night out at Claim Jumper, which must have cost a lot of money. I think she took out about 8 people and bought a whole cake to top it all off. They had eaten the first 2 layers, so she gave us the remaining 4. We thanked her profusely and she left. Back then, the big social media platform was MySpace, and I decided to look up some of the people in the department to make friends. I came across Aaron's page, and I noticed some photos of him and the rest of his crew at Claim Jumper with Amy. However, when I read the comments, he bragged about how he had purposefully ordered the most expensive dinner, appetizers, and drinks since Amy was buying. He bragged about how he was going to take advantage of her stupidity. This alone pissed me off because she was doing this super nice and generous. What an ungrateful, selfish dick. Then I read the rest of his profile. He had videos and memes on his page glorifying himself as a badass firefighter, bragging about running into burning building and how he was such a hero. He was flirting with girls, blatantly trying to impress them with how brave he is. Bear in mind, he just graduated from the academy 3 months prior and hadn't even gone to EMT school. He had never been to a house fire, and all he basically did was carry gear for the other fully qualified firefighters. It was too much for me to tolerate. So here's the revenge. I printed off copies of his MySpace page, including his comments about Amy and toxic bragging. I made multiple copies and took them to every station in the department. We all had pagers, God I'm old, and a small keyboard at each station to send out text messages. I made an anonymous, all-staff page to everyone in the department. I had to keep it brief since I couldn't fit a ton of characters, but I sent out his MySpace info and told everyone about how he treated Amy. Within an hour, Aaron had cleared out his MySpace page of all posts, photos, etc. A couple of days later, he deleted his account. It's a good thing I made so many copies. Immediately after this happened, he stopped coming to volunteer, and a few weeks later, I heard that he had quit. I later talked to Amy and admitted I was the one who sent the page. I told her I hated how he treated her, and she thanked me. She seemed really sad and hurt by what he had done, but being the tough, short lady that she was, she quickly got back into being an actual badass firefighter. She later started dating and married a fire chief that also helped at the academy. I've lost touch with her, but I hope she did well. She seemed pretty happy last time I saw her. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you